Security, escort this gentleman out, please.
Come on, Soda Pop, let's go.
Okay, let's move on to our administration building. Update on the 300 building analysis, Sue Quanbeckett. Morning.
Good afternoon. Thank you for allowing us to come today. We're here at your request, actually. The council asked us to do an assessment of the 300 building to see if it would be a workable solution to solve the city's space needs. I'm here today with members of the assessment team, including Jeff Hazard from Koch Hazard, Jerry Fromm from Henry Carlson Company, and Dick Strausberg from Tegra. So we'd like to go through our entire presentation. We'd be happy to answer any questions at its conclusion. Thank you. I'm going to turn it over to Jeff.
Thank you, Sue. I'm Jeff Hazard with Koch Hazard Architects. For those of you who may not be aware of where the building is, it's located at 300 North Dakota. Not a big surprise. It was built in 1971, so it's 45 years old, which is getting to the point where most buildings are in need of some significant updates. It's 81,300 square feet, so it's about the same size as the building that was proposed, is proposed, the new admin building that's proposed. It was designed for multiple tenants as opposed to a single tenant, and it's on 6 floors. There's the 6-story tower building, and then there are 2 one-story wings that are actually currently not, there's no circulation between those wings and the main floor. The building's divided, does not have a sprinkler system. It's divided into multiple buildings as a result. And so it's actually 3 buildings. And those buildings have different floor levels as well. The south building is about 4 inches higher than the middle, and the north building is about 4 inches lower than the middle. So we in Henry Carlson Construction received some documentation from the 300 building owners, and we visited the building multiple times. I've probably been there 6 times myself to confirm conditions. So we reviewed those documents, confirmed them, or updated them. We prepared drawings that would show how the city's program would fit, or how the city's program would compare with the space available in that building. And we identified, probably the primary thing we did was to identify the modifications to that building that would need to be made in order to create a safe, efficient, and productive environment for city staff. And then based on that list, Henry Carlson has put together an opinion of the cost of implementing those modifications. And then we, together with Tegra, compared those costs with the costs of other recent projects, similar office building projects in Sioux Falls. What we need to do to this building to make it appropriate for occupancy by the city over the long term is to, number one, replace the HVAC system. The current system comprises a large number of rooftop units. It incorporates a sort of obsolescent control system. And, it's parts of it are at least, the 45 years old. Electrical system would need to be updated or replaced. The city would require an emergency generator and a variety of other modifications. Plumbing systems need to be replaced. All the restrooms would need to be torn out and replaced because they don't meet current code for accessibility. Windows are not energy efficient and should be replaced. And it's not unusual for windows in a 45-year building to have reached the point where they need to be replaced. Technology keeps marching forward, and buildings need to be updated from time to time to keep pace with technology and to remain competitive in the marketplace. The elevators are 45 years old. would seem imprudent to us to move into a building with elevators that could break down at any time. In fact, a couple of times I was in the building to review conditions. At least one of the elevators wasn't working, and one time neither of them were working. Some of the roof would need to be replaced, and we would need to make provisions to connect the three now separate buildings. As part of this, well, the interior partitions, nearly all interior partitions would need to be removed and replaced because the configuration does not at all meet the needs of the city's program. There are some additional issues that we discovered with the building are in relationship to the current 2015 IBC, which is the code which all new buildings must meet. The stairwells are undersized. They fail to meet code in a variety of ways, including the tread width, which in this building is not 37 inches compared to 44 inches being required in a new building. The tread depth, which is 10 inches in this building compared to 11 inches required in a new building. The presence of only one handrail, whereas a new building would be required to have two, and the lack of an appropriate guardrail along the sort of edges of the stairs where they drop off to the next level. So we think the stairwell should be rebuilt. The building does not have a fire sprinkler system. It would be required to have a fire sprinkler system. And I think I already mentioned the restrooms are, don't meet current accessibility requirements. So when you get right down to it, the only real option for the city for this building is to sort of gut the interior and totally renovate it. And then once you've done that, there are some features of the building which are, would compromise the long-term ability to use it effectively. The tower has small floor footprints, 9,000 square feet compared to 20,000 feet in the proposed new building. In a typical 9,000 square foot floor, there are 12 columns compared to 6 columns in a typical 20,000 square foot floor in the new building. So there are actually 4 times as many columns on a square foot basis in the 300 building as in the proposed new building. The ceiling height in the tower really can't be higher than 8 feet, and it really can't be lower than 8 feet because that's what code requires, which makes it a challenge because the floor-to-floor height in the tower is 11'8". Most new buildings are 14 feet. I think some of you toured the former, DocuTap building. That building has, I think, roughly somewhere between 12'8" and 13-foot floor-to-floors. So there's at least an extra foot of ceiling height in that building compared to the 300 building. And that foot really makes all the difference because if you take the 11'8" in the 300 building, subtract the 1'9" for the floor slab and the beams and the fireproofing, and then subtract 5 inches for the ceiling system and the lighting and so on, and then subtract 8 feet, you're left with 1'6" of space between, above the ceiling where you have to run all your ductwork, all of your communications, wiring, all of your plumbing, and the fire sprinkler system fire sprinkler piping that doesn't currently exist in the building. So we think it'd be very challenging to fit all that in there, but as we're recommending that the stairs be rebuilt, we're thinking that the shafts that the stairs currently occupy could be retasked as air shafts to better distribute the air around each floor. And you know, I'm not sure how much you want to hear me talk about the ceiling heights, but I think they're pretty important, you know, in order to, you know, natural light, a sense of openness, the distribution of artificial light, all of those things in an open office environment as the city needs work much better with higher ceilings. I don't think we've designed a building that had ceilings where the ceilings were less than 10 feet in the last 10 years. And then finally, there is only a partial basement with no elevator access, and so the building functionally is unable to provide the program element of basement parking. And we were proposing to have the mechanical space in the basement of the building, in the new building, just so that it's easier to maintain, you're using better, longer life equipment. And anyway, later on, if you have questions, I'd be happy to get into more detail. So, is this where I turn it over to Jerry?
Good afternoon, Jerry from Henry Carlson Company. I was asked to review the cost analysis and comparison that we assembled for the 300 building. Jeff did a pretty good job of explaining the scope of work that we included in our estimate. In addition to that, we've listed a few things here other than necessarily the cost of construction, but obviously to compare the 300 building to the proposed admin building, we'd have to include design costs, the building construction, demolition, remodel costs. Those are all the things that Jeff spelled out. We also included the Van Epps Park improvements, the on-street parking improvements that would be necessary on Dakota Avenue, the corridor signage that was included in the admin building budget is included in the 300 building for consistency in the comparison between the two projects, and then other owner costs such as furniture, fixtures, equipment, legal and admin expenses. Those things were all included to keep this comparison consistent. So here you can see the side-by-side illustration. The admin building budget is left unchanged from the February and April review that we had done with the council. So on the 300 building, you can see the purchase price, the $6 million. That's the figure that's been discussed previously and thrown around. Construction costs. So the scope that Jeff mentioned, our estimate for that is $11,668,000. Professional services are based on a percentage of the cost of the construction. On a renovation project, we would expect that percentage to be a little bit higher than on a new building. So you can see we've multiplied a higher number by smaller construction costs. So overall, the professional services expense is slightly less on the 300 building. Furniture, fixtures, and equipment, that program remains relatively unchanged, so that number remains the same. Miscellaneous expenses would remain the same, and contingency you can see is slightly higher on the renovation project. Dick from Tegra will explain that a little bit more in detail, but the train of thought there is there's a lot more risk on a renovation project than there is on a new construction project, so that percentage in this case is higher. It's about 10% on the 300 building renovation as compared to the 7% that was being carried on the administration building budget. So with that, I'll turn things over to Dick with Tegra to talk a little further about his assessment of this cost comparison, and I'll be available for questions at the conclusion.
Welcome.
Thank you. So I'm Dick Strasberg with Tegra. Several of you are familiar faces and some that are new. So maybe I'll just give a little background on Tegra so you know kind of our background for the ones that aren't familiar with us. We're a consulting firm based in Minneapolis, and we focus on the end users of space, meaning that we aren't developers. We just represent end users of, in this case, could refer to the ones that are end users of office space. And we do that both on the real estate side and on the project management side. And maybe just a little background on it too, just my own personal background. I'm a South Dakota native, grew up north of Brookings, still a South Dakotan in my heart, even though I live in Minnesota. And so maybe we could just make a few comments on it in terms of how we go about these reviews. We look at this and try and just take a blank slate. We look at the costs, we look at the buildings, and just try and assess it really from a kind of a macro view on it. And some of the conclusions we had is, and these are kind of general to, first three are just general to any renovation project. I think it's fair to say that any building has risks in a construction project, but what we found is there's three that kind of tend to surface on most renovation projects. One is the structural analysis on it. Second is asbestos abatement, and the third is code related. And Jeff touched on the code issues that we know of today. But it seems like every time we get into one of these renovation projects, and we've done many, there's always a degree of surprise on these. One of the other things we looked at this building, and we don't have the rent rolls to show how the tenants are when their lease extensions are. We're usually the ones representing the tenants going into buildings like this. So we look at that, kind of what the risks are with that. The numbers that Henry Carlson put together are based on doing the project all at once. It's not a piecemeal where we do part of the building and then come back and do the other parts of it. So for that, it would mean that, the leases, everything would have to be kind of cleared out at once. And there's 40 tenants, I'm told, and I would just guess that they have various lease, terminations on them. And with that, there's broker fees, legal fees, potentially relocation costs. And on a building like this, we've renovated several similar to this. And I think we've learned is to do it cost effectively, you do it all at once. And doing a Band-Aid approach when you have to do major improvements like we're talking about here, it's best to do it all at once. And that kind of has some risk with it, which could impact the schedule on it. As far as our conclusions on this, we did an independent cost estimate on this, and then looked at Henry Carlson's, and I think we can tell you that they've got a good estimate. They were a little low on a few things like demo, and a little high on a few other ones, but overall, the number's a good number, and we'll stand behind that because we reviewed it pretty thoroughly. So those numbers are vetted, and we've also vetted the numbers on the new facility. We're involved in 3 projects right now that are similar office buildings. One out in Rapid City, it's a headquarters for Black Hills Energy, and it's under construction right now. Another one is in Maurice's in Duluth, and that is headquarters for Maurice's, and they just moved in about a couple weeks ago. And the other is Board of States Electric in Fargo. So they're the 3 projects we use as comp because we've got them in the office and they're current. And your costs that you've got on the new building is roughly $230 a square foot. The ones that I referred to, their range is between 110 and on the new building, 230. Maurice's is 210, and it ranges from there to the ones out in Black Hills, which would be 275. So you're kind of in the range, a little bit lower, but I think it's appropriate for the type of facility you're looking at. Renovation costs, they're all over the map. So I don't think it's fair for us to comment on that, other than comment that the Henry Carlson unit costs are market-based prices on it. I think that it's, I mentioned that, the risk of renovation, we're in several right now. There's always surprises. So I think you've got, that's the reason we recommend a higher contingency on going into that renovation. Operating costs, we believe will be higher in this building than a new building, even if you put in all new mechanical systems. You've got the exterior walls, R value, you've got the roof, just the energy loss on it. And you will be putting in, in the numbers is all new windows, which will help. But I think that you'll still end up with higher operating costs with just given the number of floors you have and the various systems that are kind of crammed in compared to what you'd put in a new facility. Probably the biggest thing we have, and this is really more of a real estate comment, and that is this is an ideal building for small tenants. This is what we look for. Small tenants like this because you've got the distance from the elevator and the building core to the perimeter is smaller, and when we are representing law firms and smaller users, this is what they want. And when you look at the larger users, there's the ones that I mentioned, they all have floor plates between 20,000 square feet, or in the case of Rapid City, it's a pod of the building. They kind of have two halves of the building. So you've got 20,000 square feet on the low end and 32,000 square feet on the high end of floor plate sizes. And the reason for that is there's been studies that have shown that as far as efficiency for employees walking and movement, that 20 to 30,000 square foot is the most efficient. Because when it's smaller than that, you're running up and down the elevator and the stairs a fair amount. And there's a fair amount of research on that would prove that out. So I guess the one hesitation we'd have, it's workable. I mean, you can move in there. You physically can, you can make it work. But the hesitation we'd have is just on the size and the efficiency of the end user. And then the feeling that's going to be in that space with the low ceilings. The buildings that I referenced all have between 9'6" and 10-foot ceilings, and they're all 14-foot floor to floor. And it's one thing if you're in a small office. We're in a small office. We're in a building that was built in 1961. It is very similar to this. It's got the strip windows, the whole thing. It's very, very similar. And we're a small company, and ours are 9 foot in our building, and it still feels kind of small, but we're small. I'll put that on a whole floor, which we've done. If you get a large floor, it's going to feel very low, because if you're a small space, the height, you don't perceive it as much, just like you do in your house. But when you get a bigger space, it feels low. So that'd probably be just an overall concern on it. When you open up all these floor plans and you put in open systems furniture and so on, it's gonna feel low. And the standard is definitely going higher as far as kind of a trend on it. So that would be kind of our overview on it. And I think I'll be available for questions if you got other comments, and I'd be happy to talk a lot more detail if needed.
So looking back at our original project goals to solve the city's space needs, when we look back at those project goals, there are many shortcomings with the layout of this building. In terms of the customer service aspect, with 6 floors, there's bound to be more confusion as to where to find resources, and we're definitely not going to want to have a reception area on every floor. That'd be extremely inefficient staffing-wise. In terms of the work environment, it just would not be as good as it would be in a new structure. Again, due to the things that have been mentioned already, with ceiling heights, limited natural light. I'm not going to say a whole lot more. I mean, higher ceilings are just more conducive to a large open office environment that we want. They provide better airflow and give better access to the utilities. Department collaboration was one of our primary goals, from the beginning. And again, the 6 floors versus 2 floors. With 6 floors, you're just not going to have the same level of collaboration opportunities and communication for face-to-face. Parking, there is no underground parking. There won't be in the 300 building. It's not adjacent to a city ramp as the location for the proposed new building would be. And the flexibility of the workspace. Again, the number of floors and the number of columns on each floor just hinders the functional layout of the space. And then lastly, in terms of expandability and actually room for growth, I mean, that is one of our primary goals in solving the city space needs. We need to plan for the future. And with this building, there is little to no room to expand. So to conclude, in terms of our final recommendation, we just don't feel, we've done a lot of careful analysis. We've based our conclusions on the recommendations from the professionals involved, and we just don't feel that the 300 building meets the needs of the city and is not a prudent and responsible use of taxpayer dollars. You know, it's a 45-year-old building. It was built for multiple tenants, as mentioned before. It was not designed or built as you would a public building for a single entity. The cost is almost equal to what a new building would cost that would function better for us. And our solution needs to be a long-term investment for a growing community. City services such as inspectors, engineers, we're going to need them long-term, and we're going to need space for them. The investment of the new city admin building, we believe, would provide the best value, the ability to provide enhanced public service for the long term, and provide a positive work environment. So with that, that is the conclusion of our presentation today, and we are all available to answer any questions you may have.
Okay, I would entertain some questions. Councilor Selberg.
Thank you. Thank you, Director, and thank you, everybody, for the presentation. A couple quick questions. Is it possible to get a more detailed breakdown on these numbers, the cost numbers, and have them sent out at some time? I know you can't do it this second, but possible. Thank you. And just to be clear, Koch Hazard and Henry Carlson, who conducted the study, these are the same companies that are already contracted to construct the new administration building. Is that right? Okay. And my final question would be, I know that some of us are relatively new, but has the previous council seen a similar breakdown and presentation on any other buildings similar to this one?
Mr. Chair, if we could just have in the microphone the questions that were asked answered as well, and so we're not just seeing nodding. Sorry,
Oh,
I just
okay.
wanted to make sure that all the questions were answered out loud for everyone to hear, please.
Could you do that for us, Sue?
Okay.
Would you repeat the first question, the second question, and the third?
Hello again. Thank you again. For the numbers, if there's a way to get a more detailed breakdown on those? if that's
Yes, we'd be
possible.
happy to provide that.
Okay, thank you. And then I had asked about Koch Hazard and Henry Carlson, who conducted the study. They're also the same companies contracted to construct the new administration building?
Yes, they are. We went through an extensive RFP process last year to find the best architect and the best construction manager at risk for our project. And yes, they're one and the same.
Okay. And then my last question was, has the previous council, I know in a lot of this, the debate and that, have they seen similar breakdowns and presentations on other buildings?
Well, I mean, not to this degree. Certainly, we have shared with the prior council many of the properties that we vetted in terms of, but for the most part, and I can provide certainly more information to you or to the full council on this too. We looked through over 30 properties, starting back in 2012, and then through April of 2015, because April of 2015 is when we brought forward our recommendation, which is to build a new city services building and in that location. So I have shared with, in other presentations, you know, the locations of many of the buildings that we vetted. We'd looked through different leasing opportunities. We looked at different, you know, options to buy with a long-term lease. We looked at build-to-suit options, and we also looked at purchasing existing buildings. But in terms of this type of an analysis, it never got that far.
Thank you.
Welcome.
I would ask you, if you would, could you go through a few of those buildings that you have vetted?
Sure.
Just to give us an idea of how, you know, what they are?
Sure. I mean, in terms of the existing buildings, for example, I don't know the addresses of all of them off the top of my head, but the building on North Main, 114 North Main, I believe, Chenango Logistics had been a primary tenant there, Lutheran Social Services. We looked at that building early on. It is a great space. We did use it. We leased it for about 18 months for swing space as we were doing renovations to City Hall. But it's just too small. It's about 22,000 square feet, and you know that would help us for the short term, but not for the long term. We looked at the old DM&E building. Again, I'm not sure of the address on that, but you know it's a great building. Somebody should rehab it, but it's only about 40,000 square feet. So again, not large enough to just really help us, you know, with 50 to 80-year plan. So there were many others. The communication services for the deaf campus. For example, there were 4 buildings available there, but each one is fairly small. Some of them are really old, built in the 1880s, turn of the century, and lots of historic significance and great buildings, but each of them is maybe 12 to 15,000 square feet, just too small. It's about the size of 1 floor of City Hall. So again, and then you'd have another building to take care of, another roof, another, HVAC system, et cetera, and just each of them is just too small. So there were other options. Old Joe Foss School, for example, we even looked at that to see would that be a viable option. And that one, in terms of the concrete walls and the location, and that was true with many of these in terms of location, just not as ideal. So, and then parking was another primary consideration for many of these buildings. 8th in Minnesota, there's not a building there yet. We looked at that as, that I thought would be a wonderful space. Hopefully a building will get built there. We had many meetings over a 2-year period with the owner of that land, who is still, as far as I know, planning to build there. And that was a build to suit option for us. We, potentially could have maybe had a long-term lease there with an option to buy somewhere down the road. But that's a prime location in terms of we hope that that can be a commercial building and that someone could better utilize that space at 9th Minnesota rather than the city of Sioux Falls. So so many other properties in terms of smaller space just didn't have enough square feet.
Councilor Neisert.
Just a couple. Did you find any buildings in the city of Sioux Falls that the city of Sioux Falls could use as an office, or were they all eliminated? Is there any building for sale or not for sale that could work?
Not that I know of. Not that would meet all of our requirements and be as ideal of a location.
Okay. And does the city do exit interviews when somebody leaves?
Exit interviews for employees?
Yeah.
I believe you probably need to speak with Bill O'Toole about that. I do believe they do exit interviews.
Do you suppose that if we were to ask, has anybody mentioned ceiling height or air quality as a reason for leaving the city employment?
I would have no idea.
Okay. Thank you.
Councilor Erpenbach.
Can you talk, Sue, can you stay there a second? Talk to me about, I'm trying to read between the lines, and I guess I shouldn't. Just to be real honest, there were several of us that toured the DocuTap building last night, and several of us, the same group, toured the 300 building, and I'm sure we all came to our own conclusions based on that. But I just wanted to talk just real briefly about Tegra's role in this. Can you talk about, he stood up here and said that he agrees with what Coke Hazard came up with and what Henry Carlson came up with. How do we use Tegra? What other things have we used that organization for? What's their role? How much interest do they have in whether we build this, buy that, or build that, or where do they sit in this plan?
Yeah, they are definitely owner's representative. So they represent the city of Sioux Falls. We've used them in the event center project as an owner's rep. We were using them in Midco Aquatic Center, the indoor pool project, and then we're using them here now for this. They represent the city of Sioux Falls. They look out for our best interests. They don't look out for the best interests of a construction manager at risk or an architectural firm.
So if they, I'm assuming, if they decided that we didn't need to build a new building, they would tell you that. You're on the wrong track.
Correct.
Because we pay them to be honest with us,
Absolutely,
right?
yes.
I guess I'm just struggling then with, if someone can talk to me about, I'm trying to define what's the difference between remodeling and building new. And some of you know I'm in the middle of where I work now, they're doing both remodeling and building new. And some of it's, it's less desirable than others. And so I guess one of the things I wanted to talk about was the stairwells. Help me understand what's wrong with the stairwells. They have steps and they go up and down, right? So I want to understand what that is. And then I'd also like to understand why would it be more expensive to operate a building like the 300 building than it would be to do a new building? So kind of broad questions, but can you kind of, maybe Jeff, help us out?
Okay, first on the operational side of things, I think we would expect that once all the renovations were complete, that the cost of utilities between the two buildings would be similar, because we're proposing to replace windows and add insulation and update the HVAC systems. Today, however, the cost per square foot to heat and cool that building, actually all the gas and electricity costs add up to about $2 a square foot a year. Most new buildings that we're working on these days are more between $1.20 and $1.40 per square foot per year. So what we're seeing, I think, with that building, and we haven't done a detailed analysis, we just reviewed the utility bills that we were provided, is you're seeing a building with an inefficient HVAC system and not a lot of insulation. So that's all I can really speak to is the cost of utilities as a portion of the operating costs. I'm sorry, what was the first question?
The other question was about stairwells, and if I could add to that, Mr. Chair, I would like to ask too about the ceiling heights.
I will allow it. Yep, go.
So if you can talk about the stairwells, and then I'll frame the ceiling height question for you. Why are they, because I looked at them, the stairwells look fine to me. They're just stairs. So talk about what that means, that these wouldn't be adequate.
Okay, so stairs, the code for exiting is probably the most important single part of the building code. And that's because in the event of a fire, it's important to get people out of the building quickly and safely. In an office building, like multi-story office building like this, the minimum width of a stair in a new building is required to be 44 inches. In this building, it's 37 inches, so it's substantially narrower. In a new building, treads are required to be 11 inches deep. All new buildings have 11-inch deep treads. This building has 10-inch deep treads, which means that someone used to 11-inch treads might, conceivably trip and fall down the stairs. And then there's only one handrail, and so if you happen to be on one side of the stair, you're not going to be able to catch yourself with the handrail. And there's no normal guardrail, so you could potentially, fall over the side of the stair. I think that, there is another code called the Existing Building Code, which allows for the grandfathering of existing stairs that met code when they were built. We don't know, and we have some doubt that these stairs actually met code when they were built. But there's a good, there's a chance that they did, but the small size of these stairs is unusual. So there's a good chance. Then the other thing is there's the authority having jurisdiction has the ultimate say over how the code is enforced. That person is in the building department in Sioux Falls, and that person could well decide that those stairs could stay. We, on the other hand, as an architecture firm, would not recommend that you use those stairs because we think they present a safety hazard.
Then my other question is about ceiling height, and we did look at those buildings. We looked at the DocuTap building, and then we compared it to there's the lower ceilings in the 300 building. In the DocuTap building, they took out all of those lower ceilings and just popped everything up to the top, spray painted everything black, and used the full height between the floor, the top of the floor on this floor and the bottom of the floor on the next floor, and counted that as the ceiling. But you're saying to us that our ceilings, if we went to the 300 building, the ceilings would only be 8 foot. Can you talk about why that is? Why can't we just pop that ceiling and just voila, there's all that space?
Well, you would not be required to have a ceiling in the new building. We weren't proposing to put a ceiling in. I'm sorry, you would not be required to have a ceiling in the renovated 300 building. We weren't proposing to put one in the new building. The reason to have a ceiling would be to hide, the sort of all of the ductwork and the communication lines and that sort of thing. I think it begins to become a little bit of a jumble when you have a very tight space to work with. And I just would reiterate that there's at least 1 foot of difference in the height that you have in the, there's at least 1 foot more of height in the 300 building than there is in, I'm sorry.
Pick a building.
Step back.
In the DocuTap building.
There's at least an
little
extra
taller.
foot in the DocuTap building compared to the 300 building, and that's a very important foot. In a deeper, and that building also has much deeper floor plates, so what they were able to do in that building is build low ceilings in a section down the middle of the building and run most of their ducts and all that sort of thing above those low ceilings, and then just shoot air out into the open spaces. So you didn't see a lot of ductwork and so on out in those open spaces. And we could, if we were, let's see, in the event that the city did acquire that 300 building, we would obviously do everything we can to make that space as good as it could be. But that it's going to be a little bit of a mess up there because we don't have the total width in the building in order to be able to have that sort of central lowered ceiling area and still have the kinds of open office spaces that we need to accommodate the city staff. Is that making any sense?
Yeah, it does, absolutely. Thank you, I appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Councilor Staley.
For Jeff Hazard, how wide are the, I have 3 things, okay, one for him. How wide are the stairwells at City Hall?
I don't know.
Would they be up to code today?
I don't know.
Could you, does someone know, Sue?
Well, I do know that the stairs that I've been in City Hall are wider than code would require. I haven't probably been in all the stairs, but the main ones that you go up and down, the public goes up and down, are definitely wider than code would require.
Okay, thank you. And then Sue, I have 2 questions for you, just clarifications. We met with you, I believe, about a month ago, and just to clarify, the new building, for as far as what the immediate capacity or the number of employees that would be going over was between 90 to 100?
That's correct, yes.
Okay, and then also, did I hear you say in our meeting that the bottom level was going to have a gym, a shower area for the employees, kind of a physical fitness area for them?
We would have, the proposed plan does have locker rooms and showers. So not a fitness center per se, but a place for people that like to bike to work, for example, to shower off and change.
Okay,
Yep.
thank you.
And was that that was in the basement, I believe, not on the first
It is in the
floor?
basement, yes.
Yeah. Okay. Anything else, Counselor?
Thank you.
Other counselors? Any other questions? Yes, Counselor Kiley.
Just a question about the age of the building, expected life expectancy of the 300 building, if either Jeff or Jerry would care to. I know in the absence of a structural integrity study, it might be difficult to make that estimate, but what would you estimate a new building versus a remodeled 45-year-old building? How would the life expectancy of the two compare?
There's no evidence that we observed of any significant structural settlement or cracking or anything like that in the 300 building. So we don't know what its load-bearing capacity is, but it appears to have accommodated whatever loading it's had on it, since it's been built. So, and we're proposing to replace most of the systems in the building. What would remain would be the structure, the fireproofing, and the facade, precast concrete and brick. Those elements, should easily be able to have at least another 50-year lifespan, if not more. If they're properly maintained, those elements could last practically forever. The new building is the same thing. I don't think on an as-completed basis there would be a huge difference in lifespan, but I would just point out that, if I may, that qualitatively, I mean, the time spent over the life of the building in the new building would, I think, be better than in the 300 building for all of the various reasons that we've described already. But I think ultimately the buildings would probably have very similar lifespans. All buildings eventually are hit with a period of obsolescence. You know, right now we're going through a period where all lighting is being, all fluorescent lighting is being replaced with LED lighting. I mean, there are very few new buildings being built with fluorescent now. And I think over time, LED is going to completely change the way we light buildings. And, so there will continue to be these technological shifts that have an impact on how we design buildings and what kinds of operational costs you can achieve depending upon what systems you incorporate. So the new building would need some renovation over the course of its life as well, but probably not for 50 years. Does that help? Or?
It does.
Good. More questions? Councilor Erickson.
Thank you. I have some questions in regards to the cost comparison. I'm not sure if it's Sue or Henry Carlson. My first question is what's the value of the land that we purchased, and how long ago did we purchase it, and for what amount? And is that included in the cost?
Sue, can you answer that question for us?
In terms of the city-owned surface lot, that is our proposed location for the new admin building, is what we're talking about. That was purchased during Mayor Munson's administration in 2007, and I don't know the dollar amount, but we can find that out and let you know.
Okay, that would be great. That is important to me because I feel that that price, however, was in advance and probably since paid off. I think it's important to include that in there. I know when I built my house and paid our lot in advance, I still had to include that in the cost of building my house. The other question I have for you, Sue, is, if we are talking about the 300 building, why include Van Epps Park improvements and all the rest of it? Why not compare building to building and that's it?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, the main reason that we did that was just to show an apples-to-apples comparison as much as we could. And in that original figure that we gave you back in February 23rd, and then again in our April presentation, the 21.9 million, we wanted to continue to show you that number. That's the number, the budget number that we gave you, and it included all of those things. So that's why we thought that whether we were building new or renovating, we would include the park expenses and the improvements to the main avenue in terms of the diagonal parking as part of both projects, and that's why.
But we wouldn't have to necessarily do that with the other one. Part of the intent, I think, for asking for this comparison was really to find out maintaining service as well as a cost savings. Really, we want to talk about saving money. How can we save money? And so that's the intent, is to find that way to save the dollars and maintain the service for our citizens. I don't have a lot of citizens coming to me telling me how terrible our service is, which is a great testament to our administration and the staff. I mean, they're telling me how fast the potholes are being filled. Not everybody loves it, but at the time when they need to be filled, things are getting done, and service is great. We talk about our citizen survey, and not one time is an item brought up about service and lack thereof. So I have, some concerns with that. If I can, Mr. Chair, I'd like to bring up Mr. Bresky and ask him some questions in regards to his building, into the building, because I know that we're being told some different numbers back and forth. We've been talking about a tenant buyout. We also heard Tegra say you wouldn't have to. It makes more sense for their opinion, but you wouldn't have to. We're not talking about renovating the entire building at once and bringing in approximately $350,000 a year, annually, is a big chunk of money that could be then just reinvested in the building while maintaining those tenants. So I have some questions for Mr. Bresky, if I may, in regards to the ceiling heights and the stairwells. I'd like you to touch on that a little bit, those two items, as well as talking about potential buyouts, or talk to me about the leases there and what that looks like. And I guess I'll go from there.
All right, I'm Dennis Bresky. I'm with NAI Sioux Falls. I've been in commercial real estate for about 25 years. Regarding the stairwells, I guess I would want to get another opinion on that. They seem very adequate to me. They're pretty wide. They're very functional. They're almost never used. Adding a handrail to me would seem rather simple. You know, there could be some modifications, the length of the tread. I've been up and down them. They seem very easy to go up and down to me. I didn't find anything awkward about them at all. So I think the stairwells can be usable as they are. And in terms of the tenants, Danielle Merrill, who's here also is one of the owners of the building, has really been managing this building, knowing that there's a transition coming, knowing that KSFY was moving out. Anyway, she has many of the tenants are month to month, okay? So it's very easy to work with a lot of the tenants. One of the beauties of this building is that a lot of the tenants can be retained to preserve a significant amount of income, which is nice to have a building that is 20,000 square feet larger. I strongly disagree with the no room to expand comment, because the building is being planned as 60,000 square feet of total office space. This building already has 79,000 square feet of office space above ground. So this has 20,000 square feet more room than the proposed building, and you have tenants in place that can pay rent while you're waiting to move into that space, which is a very significant factor in my mind. So I don't think there's only a couple of tenants that have longer lease terms, and you just keep those tenants because you're only planning to use 40,000 square feet in the new building. We have 40,000 square feet vacant very easily on the ground floor and the second floor in the 300 building, if that's the building you decide. But I'm here as a building representative, but also as a taxpayer and someone who had a good year last year and paid a lot of taxes. I just am very interested in the city exploring all options and really investigating this. I just have a lot of conflicting information relative to what's been presented here. So
Talk to me about the ceiling height too, please.
Okay, thank you.
the ceiling height I measured is 11 foot 10 inches from the floor to the bottom of the deck in the 300 building. It's very close to the same as the DocuTap building, which I toured a lot of you through. And the way they did that over there at the DocuTap, I thought was very creative. It has the sprayed on insulation. They just painted that black. It gives it a much higher feel. And it's really kind of the way office spaces are being finished off a lot. Having the ductwork exposed and having it painted black is not an uncommon thing. I think everybody that went through the DocuTap space felt like it was pretty cool space. Eric revealed to us yesterday that they got their improvements done for $50 a square foot. That was their allowance, and they finished off their space for $50 a square foot. So I strongly disagree that all you can have is 8-foot ceilings in the 300 building. And you haven't asked me questions about other things, but I got other things I disagree with.
If I can ask one more.
You may.
My other question is in regards to the construction costs, because it is, what was presented today is substantially higher than some of the other conversations and some of the other due diligence that some of us have done on our own, just reaching out to other people. I know I haven't talked to you about this particularly. My husband's in the real estate market, and so I've reached out to a few other people. And just curious, walk me through the construction cost. And I mean, you've been in the business for 25 years.
Right, and I'm not an architect, I'm not a contractor, I don't build a lot of buildings, but I certainly interact with architects and construction companies all the time, and I'm working on projects right now where we're getting bids to build new construction. I had two very seasoned commercial contractors tell me that $70 a square foot is a very adequate budget to completely gut a building and remodel and build it back, even including heating and air conditioning systems. A good example is very recently done DocuTap at $50 a square foot. Now, they probably didn't use their tenant improvement allowance to put the new elevators in or to put the HVAC systems in or the new windows. The landlord did that. But that's where there's extra money there to do that. So, again, different people have very different opinions. These are very respected contractors in town. So, $100 a square foot to build a shell, okay? Dale Jans, who owns the building, the land right next to the city's parking ramp, Just called him, just talked to him. I said, Dale, you're marketing this new building. Have you priced it? Yes. He built the First Bank and Trust building, $80 a square foot for the shell. I said, what's the price to build a shell today? $100 a square foot to build a shell. Is $70 enough to build an allowance, or a build-out allowance for the tenant improvements? Absolutely. 170 total. So it just makes me wonder, again, that's where my taxpayer hat comes out as to why do we have to spend much higher amount of money to build a building? Just doesn't, something doesn't feel right. And so, and I was called into this by one of your predecessors to, what other options are out there. And this building has been one that's always been on my mind, but there may be other buildings that are out there. My main thing is I hope you can take some time to step back and investigate this further, because there's a lot of conflicting information.
One final question, and not for you,
This is an
Mr.
important topic, so let's go.
Not for you, Mr. Brisky. Thank you very much for your time, but I just have a question in general in regards to the cost comparison. And I'm sure you said it and I'm missing it. I just want to make sure that I don't misspeak it later. So when we're comparing the administration building and the 300 building, the administration building, we're talking about only the 40,000 square foot with the shell on the second level. Is that correct, Sue? Just reiterate to me exactly this number and what it includes, and then as far as the 300 building and what that.
In terms of the new admin building as proposed, it would include underground parking level. It would include 2 finished levels, 20,000 square feet per level. It would include a 3rd floor shell, and it would have footings and foundations to allow for a 4th story down the road.
To potentially get to 80,000 square feet potentially?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
So.
And then in terms of the cost per square foot, I'm going to turn it over to Jerry.
Yeah, no, I don't need the cost per square foot then. What I'm wondering about the 300 building is if that amount is for how much finished square footage. So you've got $21,586,000. What does that buy me for square footage?
So that's the tower and the 2 adjacent buildings.
So that's the 79,000 square feet?
I think it's 81,300 gross.
Okay. So we're getting 81,000, because when we look at the numbers side by side, it looks quite alarming that they're so similar, but we're getting much more for the other, with the potential that we still have to spend that money down the road to finish the insides of the interior of those 3rd and or 4th shells. So it's not necessarily comparing the apples to apples with that. Okay, I'm done with my questions. Thank you. I appreciate everybody for answering the questions and being here, and I'll pass it off.
Seeing no other ones, Jerry, could I ask you to comment on a couple of things? I'm sorry, you didn't have your hand up right away.
You can go ahead.
No,
I'll
you go
follow.
ahead, I'll be last.
Okay. For Mr. Bresky, please.
He just left. Well, I'll wait just another second or so to see if he comes back in.
Yeah, I would suggest you could do your
Okay, I'll do mine, and
questions.
if we can get Jerry back, or Dennis back, we will. Jerry? We're talking about, on a new building, somewhere around $230 a square foot to put it up. On the estimation by Mr. Bresky, he said we could build out for $70 a square foot after the demolition had basically taken place, which would maybe be $50 a square foot. So we're talking $120, $130 a square foot. I had well, tell me why the difference.
Can you, I'm a little confused as your square footage is. Are we talking new construction or renovation?
New construction was about $230 a square foot, right?
Yep.
On the remodel, if you will, the renovation of the 300 building, we're talking about 130, 150.
Correct.
Why the difference?
Comparing new construction to the renovation?
Right.
Well, essentially what you're buying for the $6 million on the 300 building is the structure. You're buying the structure, the land, You're buying the facade, the things that would remain after we've completed the demolition. So when we did our analysis, we tried to compare a 300 building that would fit the program that was created for the new construction. So that's why the decision was made when we created our estimate to gut that building back to the bones, back to the steel, the concrete, the roof. Part of the roof has been replaced, so we've taken that into consideration. We're not going to replace the entire roof. We have decided to replace all the windows. It's a prudent thing to do on a building of that age. Sure. But the brick and the precast skin that's on the building would remain. So what you're seeing there is the difference between the buying an existing structure and building a new structure to essentially get to the point where you're doing a tenant finish build out on the inside of the building.
But you still haven't answered the question of why does it cost $230 to build new and $170 to renovate?
We're looking at two very different things.
Okay.
The 130 that you're talking about.
Or 170, somewhere in there to renovate?
Right. That price, I'm just looking at my notes here. Actually, when you include the purchase price of the property, it's higher than that. We end up at around $217 to renovate, with the purchase price at $6 million.
So what Mr. Bresky is telling us is that it's not, that's not as easy a deal. We are either going to put in more quality.
So the question that I would have on, it's difficult to compare when you just talk about a cost per square foot. We can certainly renovate a building for the cost per square foot that Mr. Bresky spoke of. Will it fit the program that we've discussed on the new building? I think that's where the difference of opinion comes in here. $50 a square foot, certainly we can renovate a building for $50 a square foot if we're talking simple tenant finishes. But when you look at a government entity switching this building from multi-tenant to single tenant, there's a lot of different things that come into play. And we're designing the HVAC systems that we've budgeted for the renovation, the electrical systems that we've budgeted for the renovation are designed to last the long haul, that 50 to 100 years that Jeff talked about. I think a lot of times when you're dealing with that $50 to $70 a square foot on a renovation, the owner, the person that's investing that money is looking at more of a 20 to 30 year turnaround. Those systems will be wore out and need to be renovated again in a much shorter period of time than that 50 plus years that we're looking at in our budget numbers. So I think that probably that's a lot of the reason why there's a difference between the budget numbers that Mr. Bresky's talking about and the budget numbers that we've included in our assessment.
Thank you, because that's what I had explained to me by a developer in town, well-known developer, who said, if we're going to build a government building that's 50 to 100 years lifespan, it's going to cost us 50% more than to build one that we've been building. Right. Which we know in 20 to 30 years we're going to have to go in and gut and start over again with. Right. And so that would be part of the explanation that you're saying, that yes, building it new is a little more expensive than just renovating to what today's current standards would be. Right. So this really comes down to scope, is what it comes down to, because the builders in town, Dale Jans, Henry Carlson Company, Journey Construction, we all have a pretty good handle on what the costs of materials are and the cost of construction is. Where the real difference comes in is when you start talking about scope. Because I think we've looked at this from a perspective, let's match the program, the finishes, the type of construction that was proposed in the admin building too. So we have something to compare to. Otherwise, we're comparing two very different buildings. Got it. And the numbers really aren't going to mean anything to you, because we're comparing apples to oranges. Mr. Hazard, did you have something you wanted to add to that?
I just wanted to clarify a couple things, if I may. With regard to the ceiling height, again, I thought I heard Mr. Bresky say that the distance from the floor to the deck was 11 foot 10. The floor to floor height, which is the distance from the floor to the next floor in that building, is 11 foot 8. So I don't know what he was measuring, but it's not possible for it to have been any more than 11 foot 4.
Well, we saw, he had a fancy measure.
Yeah, and I was
And it
just,
may be an
I
inch
was
or two
just,
off, but-
about an hour and a half ago, I was at the DocuTap building, and I measured the height from the floor to the underside of deck, and it was 12 foot 3. So you're talking about the difference between 11 foot 4 and 12 foot 3, or maybe, so it's rough, it's about a foot difference.
Okay.
And as I mentioned before, that foot is a very important foot. The other thing that I would like to point out is that the effectiveness of any given square foot in the 300 building is not as high as it would be in the new building. Because of the columns and the location of the elevators and the restrooms and the size of the floor plates, you need more square footage in the 300 building to accommodate the same number of people. So when we sketched out how the various departments would lay out in the 300 building, it was clear that in order to accommodate those elements that are on the first floor of the new building, as well as there are a few things in the lower level of the new building, like some of the staff support areas, you would need all of the first floor and the second floor. Then to accommodate what's on the second floor of the new building, you would need all of the third floor and the fourth floor of the 300 building. So that leaves you with the fifth and sixth floors. I'm getting myself mixed up here. But so the first floor of the new building would take up the first and second floors of the existing building. See if I.
No, that would be.
No, that's not right. The first floor of the new building would fit on the first floor of the 300 building. The second floor would take the second and third floors, and the shelled third floor would take the fourth and fifth floors, leaving we could build a fourth floor on the new building. The sixth floor of the 300 building would only accommodate half of that square footage. So, I mean, I think the expandability is a significant issue.
Any other questions?
Yes.
Councilor Kiley.
And whether this is Sue or another member of our team, Mr. Bresky referred to the tenants and the ability to retain tenants and income. What effect does that have on our funding and our securing bonds? And are all these tenants not-for-profit tenants or governmental tenants that exist in the current building?
Tom Huber with the Finance Department.
Yes, Tom.
The bonds that are proposed for the new administration building would be tax-exempt bonds. And you do have, when you are purchasing or constructing using tax-exempt financing, you do have private activity tests that come into play. I believe it's around 10% of what you do can be private activity before you run into issues with the laws and regulations regarding tax-exempt financing, which then would take you to a taxable type of issue in order to accommodate not having to worry about certain private activities.
So retaining all of the current tenants, as was suggested, could jeopardize the tax-exempt status of our bonds.
You may not be able to fund the entire issue with tax-exempt bonds.
Some of it.
All right, at least a portion of it. Thank you. And then another, and I can direct these to other people since Mr. Bresky has elected to leave.
No, he's here now.
Is he?
Yes.
Did he come back in? Good, come on.
Bresky,
come
can
on
we
forward.
have you up again, please?
Okay, Mr. Bresky, you'd mentioned the stairwells as being pretty wide. Do you know if that would be acceptable to the current code?
I don't, but I think it should be investigated by another party.
Okay, and you had already stated that you're not an architect and that you're not in the construction business. You are a?
I'm a commercial real estate agent.
Okay, and what is your role in this building?
I have, like I said, I was brought into the process by one of the counselors to ask what other options are there. So I am representing the sellers, the owners of the property, and promoting the property as an option to the city of Sioux Falls.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Thank you very much, and thank you for coming back in. Appreciate it.
Yep.
Thank you.
And then if I could have somebody address the code issue with the stairwell, please? I think it was addressed before.
I think it was addressed before.
But let's have it, since that was brought up again,
Yeah,
if we
Mr.
could have
Hazelby?
either Jeff or Jerry. Jeff or Jerry, when you do a remodel, do you have to, can things be grandfathered in, or do you have to build according to today's code?
It's been my experience that in certain situations, projects have been grandfathered in if they met the code at the time the building was built, and there would be a significant financial hardship to bring them up to existing codes or the current code. My other, just my opinion in this case, being a public entity like the city would be, I think there's a certain amount of risk associated with having a stairwell that doesn't meet code. In the event of a fire or catastrophe, anyone that's read or studied the things that happened on 9/11, those stairways, people need to be able to move through them quickly. Someone falling down can lead to a backup, and I just think it opens the door to a certain amount of risk that any tenant of that building or owner of that building would inherit. And I think that's something that the city would have to ask themselves, is this a risk that we want to inherit?
And is it possible to just increase the height of a riser or the depth of a tread without having an impact on the whole stairwell?
Unfortunately, the floor-to-floor height is what dictates how many treads and risers will be needed, and that will impact the width of the stairway. So from one end of the stair to the other, not necessarily the width that you would walk down, but how far you walk between landings. So given that this is an existing building, that those dimensions have already been determined. So to change the rise and run of the stair in the existing stairwell wouldn't work with and match the existing floor heights. So what we did was we included in the renovation budget 2 new stairwells, one on each end of the tower section of the building. It's important to note that the existing stairs in the 300 building currently do not access the first floor. So if you were a customer or a tenant and you wanted to access anything above first floor, you'd have to ride the elevator to second floor before there would be access to the stairs. Not a big deal in the current use of the building because everyone uses the elevators. But if the city occupied the building and they wanted to be able to use the stairs to get from first floor to other areas, we'd have to include some modifications for that. Currently, those stairs access the alley on the east side of the building. That's how you would exit the building from the stairwell.
Okay.
Councilor Neisert?
Can somebody clarify for me what the 50% more for government buildings comment was about?
I think I'm the one that mentioned that, and what I said was that in visiting with a contractor that I know is well respected in town, he indicated that building a new building for government for the quality and the standards that they would want generally costs somewhere around 50% more than putting up a standard building.
Than a private entity?
Yeah, because
Wow.
because we're building it as I think either you or Jeff said. They build them for 20 to 30 years and then have to go in and tear them all apart and put it back together, where a 50 to 100-year building is built for 50 to 100 years of not having to do that kind of thing.
So would it be fair to say the CNA Surety building is going to topple in 30 years?
No, I didn't say that. I said they will come in and redo and renovate, completely renovate the inside of it, long before a building, the kind of quality that they're talking about putting up, or that we're talking about putting up would need that, which in the long run saves money.
Okay, so we are going to build a building that's 50% more expensive per square foot than in the private sector. That's what we're proposing.
We're proposing, I think they're proposing putting together a better quality building than what generally is being built under today's standards. Am I correct on that? And that does cost more money, yes.
To clarify, I think anytime someone builds a building, they have a plan on what kind of return they're going to expect to get out of that building, and there's usually a life expectancy to that. So I think the longer the life expectancy of the building, which schools, city administrative buildings, those types of buildings, you would want that to be as long as possible. And you would do an analysis when you're selecting your HVAC systems, your materials, all those things, and try to get the best value over the expected life of the building.
Okay. Could I ask a question of Tegra?
Sure.
Just to clarify, you're the owner's representative for the city of Sioux Falls.
Correct.
Is that correct? Do we have an owner's representative for this administration building?
We've made comments on it. We aren't playing an active role.
Are you compensated for that, or are you just compensated a blanket amount through the city of Sioux Falls for your
We're
work?
compensated on an hourly basis for whatever we're
On an
asking.
hourly basis. Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Can I make one other comment?
Yeah,
You may.
please.
I think it's fair to say when we talk about the quality of a building that's, let's call it a developer-built building versus something that's more of an institutional grade. My background is I worked in development for the first 10 years, and the last 20-plus years has been on for a variety of groups. Developer-built buildings tend to have it so they have a lower cost, upfront cost, and tend to have a little higher occupancy costs. Buildings that are built for individual users tend to have, they're just plain better systems put into it. So I wouldn't limit that just to government. I'd look at the 3 headquarters that I referred to, like take Border States Electric in Fargo. They're going to own it. They're going to put, a roof on it that's higher quality, that's longer term than probably would be if it was something that could be passed through to tenants. And it's just generally an upgrade. So I wouldn't limit that to government. I'd put it more as an institutional grade. And the numbers on the administration building are in line what it's costing of buildings that are, that are actually bid out and under construction right now. Also, just another comment on it is we represent typically 30 to 35 end users of office space on a given year. And that's been for the last 20 plus years that we've been in business. And it's rare that we end up having something where a new building makes more sense. It's very rare. We've got the 3 that I quoted right now are ones because there aren't other solutions. And that's really what the decision, in my mind, that the city is facing here. Are there other buildings that will meet the program, meet the long-term objectives of what the city needs? And I think our opinion on it is this 300 building wouldn't fit it real well. We've moved tenants into existing buildings all the time. We've got, I'm sure there's probably 10 or 15 of them under construction that we're working with in offices right now. So it's rare that we come and look at it, a situation like this, where you've got something where it's like, well, there's not another great alternative as far as something that is comparable to what you'd build new.
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay. One more.
Yep, and then I'm done.
Counselor Erickson.
We talked about the ability to expand. We heard that the 300 building doesn't have the option to expand, but we still own the land next door to the proposed administration building. So that still would be an option to expand. And I know it was recently quoted in the paper along the lines many years ago that this would be a mall of government. And so we would have all this contiguous land minus one shop down there, because across the street as well as included in the purchase of the 300 building is a parking lot as well as a kind of structurals type indoor parking I don't know how functional it is. I did not tour that. But that is also included with this. So there is probably more expense to either take that down or build something there. I don't know. But the land is certainly not going anywhere that we purchased some time ago back when Munson was mayor. And I still am curious on the cost of that. We've talked about comparing apples to apples and apples to oranges, and it's my opinion that this is not an apples to apples comparison, and that there are several variations in both the administration building as well as the 300 building that the numbers do not equal out. We are not comparing square footage to square footage. We are not comparing the same types of improvements throughout the way. So again, I appreciate everyone's time for being here. I know it was a lot of work, and that you did entertain the council by bringing this
Did you have
forward.
a question in this,
No,
Councilor?
just a statement in regards to
Well, that's,
the
we were
ability
asking
to
for
expand.
questions at this
All
point.
right, there you go.
Thank you. Any other questions? Okay, hearing none. I believe we are at adjournment, and one of the reasons I cut you off, Councilor, is because we are time limited here. We do have another fiscal meeting, so I would adjourn this meeting, and we will be ready in about 10 minutes, 10 to 15 minutes for the fiscal meeting.
Y'all come back now. Cheers.
What kind of morons run this outfit?